Early voting is underway in Illinois, but the governor still won't talk about the presidential election. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. We're all affected. It's election season, and TV and radio and ads are driving us all crazy. But anyway, here to talk about these things with me, Jordan Abudayyeh is back, State House reporter for WICS News Channel 20 in Springfield. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
And Mike Lawrence is back. He's been away for a while, and good to have you. Mike was a longtime reporter at the State House. He was then press secretary to Jim Edgar in Secretary of State and Governor's office, and has now retired from the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, where he was director. Mike, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Good to have you. As I said before we started the show, I could just do your resume and it would take the whole half hour, but here we go. So just because the presidential election is on people's minds, so we're talking a little federal today, and Donald Trump was in Chicago, and Hillary Clinton was supposed to be visiting Chicago this week also. Our governor still says, I guess he was asked if he watched the first debate, and he didn't. And he still, while he has said in the past, we got to not elect Hillary Clinton and elect the whole Republican ticket, he has steadfastly for weeks not said who he's voting for. How weird is this, Jordan?
It's a little bit weird for the first Republican governor in more than a decade, who is also supposed to be the leader of the party, to then not support the major party candidate at the top of the ticket, that in an election that he claims is going to be transformative and, really is his whole turnaround agenda is predicated upon. So it's a little bit interesting. I think if he would just come out and say that he has a tepid warmth for Trump, or that he's just going to plug his nose and do something, or no, we don't like either candidate, or I'm not voting. But I think the constant evasion of the questions just makes journalists want to keep asking the question. And, in a debate where there was a record viewership, how do you say, as the governor of state, I didn't even watch the debate? Yeah. I don't know if it is plausible.
Yeah, Mike, obviously Illinois has been trending Democratic in presidential elections in recent years. Mark Kirk is our U.S. Senate candidate, who says he won't vote for Trump, and that's part of his campaign strategy. He's even said that in advertisements. So is that what you think, the governor's just avoiding a political problem, and is he doing it the right way?
Yeah, I understand, I think, why he's doing it that way. He really wants the emphasis on the Kirk race, the race for comptroller, and the legislative races. There's still a view that most of the state will go in the presidential race for Hillary Clinton, although Trump has, I think, some significant support downstate. So I can see why the current governor is not embracing Trump. It's interesting, you mentioned Senator Kirk saying he's won't endorse Trump.
Right.
Governor Rauner's predecessor, one of his predecessors, Governor Edgar, has said that he can't support Trump. The governor of Ohio, John Kasich, these are all governors that are viewed largely as moderates, and they're in states that have substantial populations that vote Democrat normally, but have voted for some Republicans. So I think this is a absolutely pragmatic decision on his part, the way a lot of decisions are in politics, and he wants the emphasis elsewhere.
Well, he certainly does. It's kind of interesting. You mentioned Jim Edgar. So in the past week, there was an event downtown Springfield. The Better Government Association had, it turned out to be, it was a fundraising lunch, $40 a person. I guess they raised some money. But they had Jim Edgar talking, and they had Chris Kennedy, who is Robert F. Kennedy's son. He lives in Kenilworth, north of Chicago. He used to run the Merchandise Mart, a giant building that has a lot of trade shows and things in Chicago. And they spoke about politics in front of an audience. And both of them, well, Kennedy has been rumored as a possible candidate for governor, and both of them don't like Trump and said bad things about him. Former Governor Edgar, wouldn't say who he was voting for. It's a secret ballot. Kennedy is, with the Democrats, with Clinton, says she's much better. So how do we think, I know, Mike, you were there. Jordan, you watched some of this. Is Chris Kennedy a 2018 threat? He didn't want to talk about it much as a possible candidate for governor. What do we think?
Well, I think he's gearing up to run for governor.
Do you?
That doesn't mean that he'll definitely get in the race, but he's certainly moving very strongly in that direction. He's got at least a couple of bright young men who've been through campaigns in Illinois, working very closely with him.
Okay.
He started up this group, Innovation Illinois, progressive group, which they say is to counter the Illinois Policy Institute. So there's a lot of feeling that he is someone who would have the capacity to raise the kind of money that it will take to be competitive with Governor Rauner, assuming that Governor Rauner will run again.
Yeah, well, Governor Rauner has said he will, and last time his campaign was $65 million, and God knows what it will be next time.
Yeah, I think the money is definitely going to be a factor in whoever decides that they want to run against Governor Rauner. But I think another interesting thing that Governor Rauner does very well is he has traveled the state extensively. He goes to places, he's very personable, and so a Chicago Democrat is going to have to fight against the Chicago machine that doesn't play well in areas outside of the suburbs and below I-80. And so he is going to have to travel the state. He's going to have to make himself known as more than a Chicago politician. He was the chairman of the board of trustees for the U of I, so he has that going for him. And he's just going to have to do a lot between now and 2018 in the other parts of the state that don't know him as well.
Yeah, I know both Governor Edgar and Chris Kennedy were talking about they fear for higher education in the state, which is really, in the budget battles and the lack of a full state budget, universities have been some of the biggest losers. Some of them went almost a year without any funding. And I mentioned to Chris Kennedy that Governor Rauner has said in the past he doesn't even believe in tenure for college professors. And what do you think of that? And Chris Kennedy said, I think maybe he should, basically consider the tenure of his own office a kind of a joke about getting out of office. So we'll see where it goes.
I agree with Jordan. He is going to have to travel the state if he does run and become known, but he's also got the Kennedy name. It probably means a lot more to people my age and a little younger than I am, but it's certainly in terms of raising money, not only in Illinois, but across the nation. I think that name will still work very well.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Our newspaper ran an editorial from a sister paper in Peoria just the day he was here, and it was about Robert F. Kennedy and how he calmed Indianapolis on the day Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And it was just, you talk about a little bit of history, and that was just serendipitous. It just happened. So yeah, the Kennedy name, he certainly has a leg up on other unknowns in Illinois politics, that's for sure. Well, we'll see where that goes. We discussed the comptroller's race and between Susana Mendoza, who is former state representative from Chicago, now city clerk of Chicago. She's the Democratic candidate. Leslie Munger was appointed. She's from the northwest suburbs. She is appointed by Governor Rauner to replace Judy Bart Topinka after her election and death in 2000. Munger was appointed basically the day that the governor was sworn in. And their race took a turn last week because Leslie Munger's husband loaned the campaign, I think it's $260,000, which is above $250,000. And Illinois now has, after Blagojevich, campaign funding limits, unless in this, there are certain caps broken, and if a candidate self-funds more than $250,000, then all caps are off and anybody can donate as much as they want. So what does that mean to this race? And are we going to see a lot of ads on TV now for comptrollers races?
Yeah, that means that this race just got a lot more expensive. Of course, we have Leslie Munger, who is connected to Governor Rauner, and she's got the Rauner money, as all Republicans do in the state right now. And, Mendoza's got the Democrat money that, is hefty. I think with Governor Rauner's injection of cash into campaigns lately, people have been going, well, it's way more than what Democrats can bring. But, races weren't cheap before Rauner. And so they've just taken on a new life in some respects. So, yeah, this race is going to get very expensive. We've already seen the ads. I think it's probably going to get a lot more ugly now. And it's only going to get more and more expensive the closer we get to Election Day.
Yeah, Mike.
I think this race, normally the comptroller's race doesn't attract a lot of attention or analysis, but for the reasons that you and Jordan have indicated, this could. And I think there's even more of a reason. There's her strategy, the comptroller's strategy, is going to Mendoza to Madigan. And the strategy the other way will be to link Munger to Rauner. Yeah. And there's been a lot of analysis and talk about how this is all going to come out and how the relative strengths of Madigan and Rauner will appear after the election. And this race may give a clearer view of that because the legislative races get down many times to other issues.
Right. And a lot of name identification or popularity locally.
For example, in particularly downstate, people know their legislators. They're probably more likely to vote on the basis of what they think of the local legislator. Not what they think of Madigan or Rauner, although there'll be some votes that go that way.
And the TV ads will certainly be aiming them in that direction.
And I think another interesting point, too, is that I think this whole budget mess that we've been going through has really highlighted the work that the comptroller does. So in a lot of respects, she's deciding who gets paid and when, and who's waiting in line how long. We saw her delay lawmakers' paychecks, and she's really had to figure out how to manage the state's dwindling dollars at a time when there really aren't a lot of them. And so I think the next comptroller could either make Governor Rauner's life a little bit easier if this budget problem continues, or can make his life a lot harder depending on who wins that office.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say both candidates are trying to say they are independent of those people they are being associated with, because Susana Mendoza ran against the machine in Chicago when she first got elected state representative, even though now she's obviously backed by Madigan to be comptroller. And Leslie Munger notes, well, I've taken on the governor when I needed to, even though she once called herself his wingman, I guess, at the first state fair in 2015. But when he wanted the comptroller to withhold fair share dues from people who haven't joined the union, she listened to what the Attorney General said, Madigan's daughter, and her own legal staff, and said, that wouldn't be legal. I can't do it, Governor, and she didn't. So they both, they will assert their independence, while in the broader picture we all look at them, as associated with their parties. So it'll be interesting. The other interesting thing about that race, of course, is Judy Bartopinka had just won a 4-year term when she, unfortunately passed away. And Governor Rauner thought he was appointing someone to a 4-year term, or wanted to, but the legislature, when still in Democratic hands, passed a bill to make sure that in cases like this, the second 2 years of that 4-year term would be up for election, and that's why this is the only statewide election this time. So we'll see where it goes. So in the meantime, early voting did begin this week on Thursday, goes all the way through the election now, with so many more options than there used to be for voting. You don't have to have an excuse to vote absentee. You can vote early in many different ways and places. But one of the things that was big in the primary, which was election day registration and voting. So if you're not registered, or if you need to change your address to fix your registration, you can go in on election day, get it done, and vote. Then the legislature had passed a bill saying that should happen in every precinct location or every polling place in larger counties of more than 100,000, but in smaller counties, only at the election office would they have to do it. So then some conservative groups, I think it was something associated with the Illinois Policy Institute, helped bring a lawsuit that's not fair, because that gives people in smaller counties, mostly downstate, often Republican, less of a chance to vote than people in places like Chicago that are likely more Democratic. And a federal judge in Chicago agreed And so there's no more in polling place voting on election day, but like in Sangamon County, they're still going to have it at the county building. Jordan, this is going to mix up some people, isn't it?
Yeah, I think when that ruling came down, a lot of people just went, wow, this is huge, because it's so close to election day. And so many people, I think after they do something once, especially, we don't go through elections very often, so they get used to something like that. And so I think, it's just, I talked to the county clerk. He says it's going to be confusing for people. I think, we saw in the primaries here in Sangamon County that we had some issues with same-day voter registration because
there was a flood of people they didn't expect.
So many people
Yeah.
that they didn't expect at the precincts. So if we put all of those people now who flooded the precincts on primary day at one location versus the various locations, you're going to have a line out the door. It's going to be busy all day long. You're going to have people who are upset that they're not getting access to the ballot box. And so, is it unfair? Maybe in some respects. You could say, yeah, you could see the unfairness in some of it. But, in counties like Sangamon County that are so much bigger than perhaps, a southern Illinois county, it's just, I see it creating some problems. And so it's just going to create a lot of confusion. It's probably going to create very stifling long lines and craziness.
Okay. And we should say that there was still an appeal from the state trying
Right.
to change this again.
And so
but
then-
as we tape this show, right now they've changed it so not every precinct place is going to have it. You have to go to the county
and then
building.
next week we
in Sangamon
could
County.
be saying, just kidding,
Right,
everyone.
right.
It's going to go back to the way it
So
was.
keep reading the newspaper,
So,
people, and
right.
we'll keep you up to date.
So I think it's going to be confusing for a lot of people, and it's going to, if it goes back and forth, especially like we just said, I mean, at what point as a voter do you go, what the heck is going on, and how do I figure this out? So yeah, it's probably bad timing. I don't know why we couldn't have done this after an election, but of course, before an election, the pressure is on to change those things.
Well, if the ruling stands up, there's no question, it will help the Republicans.
Right,
now-
because there was going to be a lot of turnout in Chicago in particular.
Yeah.
Same-day
Now,
voting
the
was very
current-
popular there.
The current system helps the Democrats, and that's why the Democrats enacted it.
There you go.
So we'll see how the legal case goes, but in terms of the politics of it, the Republican leadership has to be feeling better about it today than the Democrats.
One would think so, yeah. Well, whatever it is, somebody will say it's a rigged system, right?
Right. And I think it's funny because I think Sangamon County kind of defies the politics of the situation. There 100% is politics behind this decision. But Sangamon County is a larger county, but it tends to skew a little bit on the conservative side. And so we have here in Central Illinois a unique position because it necessarily doesn't mean it's a political game here for many people. It's just an access game. And so maybe we're like the ideal county in the state. But, I think we kind of defy the political idea that this could help Democrats or help Republicans, and this really is about access here in our area.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the race between Mark Kirk and Tammy Duckworth for U.S. Senate. How's that looking? There are some competing ads now about, did Tammy Duckworth do wrong things when she ran the state Veterans Department versus Mark Kirk? People are bringing up again that he exaggerated his military record when he first ran for Senate. And yet the polls show this, I guess, is he's considered a very vulnerable Republican as far as senators across the country. Any predictions today?
No, not for me anyway. I do think that the conventional wisdom seems to be that Duckworth will win, but we're a long way from Election Day. The negativity of that campaign is going to turn off voters, just like a lot of other races, and in a way it's too bad because they're both pretty honorable people who've certainly done a lot of public service in their lives, and before it's all over, people are probably going to have a negative view of both of them.
Interesting.
And they both have good narratives. Kirk has overcome his stroke, and he's persevered through that, and Duckworth is a wounded vet who came from an immigrant family, and so they both have compelling narratives, but I think the ads that we're seeing each side put out are incredibly negative, and I don't think is going to make people want to vote for either one of them at that point. You know, if you see an incredibly negative campaign, it usually turns voters off.
Well, the presidential takes the cake this year, everybody knows, so maybe they'll just, sneak in. Greg Bays, the head of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, had a press conference this week, talked about the loss of manufacturing jobs, hundreds of thousands over, I guess, since the year 2000. He does want some changes that are similar to things the governor wants: workers' compensation, lower costs for business, and some tax changes. He did include something like taxing more services, but our governor has continued to say if we don't get reforms he wants in the turnaround agenda, he's not going to agree to more revenue. So I don't know where that comes. But Mike, that's interesting, because when Chris Kennedy, we were talking about earlier, was talking to the group downtown Springfield, he said that he dealt with a lot of businesses downtown Chicago and coming in from other states, and they say they just want stability. But Bays says, no, we need some of the things the governor's talking about. So where's this all going to land?
Well, I've heard Greg talk about this in several venues lately, and what came through to me was that the fiscal situation is the big negative, the fact there is no budget. Businesses like certainty, they don't like uncertainty, and we've sure got a lot of uncertainty in Illinois when it comes to the fiscal situation, what's happening in higher ed. Now, what I heard him say was that we need to get the state's finances straightened out. He does favor much of the agenda.
Yeah, certainly lower workers' compensation
Governor
costs.
Has laid out. I think that Greg understands that we've got to get the fiscal situation. That is a priority, and the uncertainty is hurting Illinois in terms of keeping jobs here and attracting jobs here.
Well, in the meantime, the governor's been running advertisements urging people to sign an online petition for term limits, and he's got a new blog where he's talking about this, and he's on those ads in the middle of this election, and the term limits can't even be on the ballot now until 2018. So why is he doing this, and is it a useful exercise?
I think he's doing it because they're popular issues. To say that I want term limits on politicians is probably one of the easiest things for you to throw out there and people on both sides of the aisle to agree with you on. So, I think in the middle of a political season where he's trying to get his people in office, if he's putting ads on TV saying, well, this is what I want, he's not going on TV and saying he wants to limit prevailing wage and collective bargaining agreements at the local level. You don't see any commercials for that. He's saying that part of his turnaround agenda is term limits on these politicians that have been in office too long, and giving you the power to draw the map, because these are the popular parts of his turnaround agenda. And so if people see those ads and they see the governor connected to him and they see the Republican candidates, I think he's hoping they kind of piece this all together and say, oh, well, we need to, this is part of the agenda, we need to make these things happen. But we're not seeing the ads on the more controversial parts of his agenda. So
yeah, and he is pretty smooth on television in those pretty well-produced ads with the different people talking. Look at those politicians. It's messed up in Springfield. Governor? Yeah, I'm over here. Hey, he's getting his chance to act. It's a good thing. One other thing that's been interesting, though, there is a constitutional amendment on the ballot. The one that made it is what they call, I guess, a lockbox or whatever. It's for taxes, like gas taxes that are supposed to go to transportation, would have to be spent on transportation and couldn't be switched to other things. Some in government, even Governor Edgar the other day said, I haven't liked putting those kind of limitations on, because if you have a crisis and you need some funding and you have a big fund over here, use it. But people in the road industry and labor unions for years have been upset with diversions from the road fund. But the governor wouldn't say, he said there's arguments on both sides, and he wouldn't say to reporters when he talked about it which side he was on this, which is kind of interesting, because you think you might have a position.
Well, it's not a simple matter, really. On the one hand, it's kind of like term limits. Well, this money is raised
for roads,
for roads, bridges, and it ought to be spent on there. The problem is that you have this huge deficit, and you have state services that are in jeopardy or in fact have been cut back.
Right.
So do you put that limit on where you can't use the road funds? I could make a pretty good argument that if it did pass, that would put more pressure on the legislature to deal forthrightly
on a full budget.
on a full budget,
Yeah.
and stop the business about raiding special funds, transportation funds, to keep things going. So, it might force a debate and action that we ought to have in the state. But whether you want to put that kind of provision in the state constitution, where there wouldn't be the flexibility, even in an emergency,
Right.
It's a good question. It's a good
Right.
one for policy wonks to sit around and talk about, if nothing else.
Right. I'm going to mention something just briefly. The AFSCME, the largest public employee union, started running, I guess, $500,000 worth of television ads with people saying the governor isn't negotiating with us. They've been out without a contract. They're out working on an old contract for like 15 months already. And that's still, we're waiting to find out if, I guess, an arbitrator, somebody, not an arbitrator, but somebody decides if there's impasse or not, or if it's a done deal, or if they have to go back to the bargaining table. So we'll see what that happens. There's also a story that's about a week old, but I thought we should talk about it. Napoleon Harris is a state senator. Some people got from Chicago, or the burbs, but up there. Some people got to know him a little better because he ran in the primary for U.S. Senate against Tammy Duckworth and lost. But he owns a couple pizza restaurants, and he was helping out his crew delivering pizza, and 3 or 4 guys at one place he delivered pizza to tried to mug him. He used to be in the NFL. He ended up kind of fighting them off, getting police to follow them, and it turns out 3 of them were arrested for a murder in Georgia.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Yeah. Next time I see him, I am not going to get in his way, because that is scary. So he fought off 3 different guys, which when you think of the NFL, you think, oh, well, that's pretty successful.
And legislators don't always have the greatest image, but we have a legislator who's also kind of did a heroic thing in Chicago, so on we go. We are about out of time, so Jordan Abudayyeh, Mike Lawrence, thanks for helping out. Thank you for watching. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.